The autumn wind swept across the Wyoming plains like the breath of winter itself, carrying with it the scent of snow from the distant mountains and the promise of a harsh season ahead. Daniel Whitehorse stood on the porch of his isolated ranch, watching the sky darken with storm clouds while his cattle huddled together in the lee of the barn. At 36, he was a man caught between two worlds, born to a Lakota mother and a Scottish father, raised in both traditions, but fully accepted by neither. His ranch sat in a valley that had been sacred to the Lakota for generations, a place where the spirits were said to walk among the living and where his mother's people had come to pray and seek visions. When Daniel had inherited the land from his white father, he had promised his mother's spirit that he would honor both legacies, protecting the sacred sites while building a life that could bridge the growing chasm between red and white. The house itself reflected this duality, built in the style of white settlers but decorated with sacred objects from his mother's people. Eagle feathers hung beside family photographs, and traditional medicines shared shelf space with books and tools. Daniel moved between both worlds with the careful grace of someone who had learned early that a single misstep could cost him everything. At 6 feet tall, with the lean build of a man who worked hard for his living, Daniel carried himself with quiet dignity. His face showed his mixed heritage clearly: high cheekbones and dark eyes from his Lakota mother, fair skin and brown hair from his Scottish father. The scars on his hands told the story of a life spent working the land, while the careful way he moved spoke of someone who had learned to be always ready for trouble, but tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air that had nothing to do with the coming storm, a sense that the fragile peace of this remote valley was about to be shattered. Daniel had been expecting trouble ever since word came down from Fort Laramie that the army was planning to move all remaining free bands of Lakota onto reservations, using force if necessary. The government's patience with the Indian problem was wearing thin. Too many settlers were demanding protection, too many politicians were promising quick solutions, and too many army officers were looking for promotions that came with successful campaigns against hostile tribes. Daniel had seen this pattern before: escalating tensions, inflammatory rhetoric, and then sudden violence that left everyone wondering how things had gone so wrong so quickly. His own position was precarious. As a man of mixed blood, he was viewed with suspicion by both sides. White settlers saw him as a potential Indian sympathizer, while some Lakota viewed him as a sellout who had chosen the white man's world. Only his reputation for absolute honesty and his willingness to help anyone in need had allowed him to maintain relationships with both communities. The cattle in his pastures were mostly longhorns, tough animals that could survive the harsh winters and find grass where other breeds would starve. Daniel had built his herd slowly over the years, trading fairly with both white cattlemen and Lakota hunting parties, earning a reputation as someone whose word could be trusted absolutely. His ranch produced enough to live comfortably, but more importantly, it provided him with the independence he needed to follow his own conscience. It was past midnight when the first shots echoed across the valley, sharp cracks that split the night air like thunder. Daniel was instantly awake, grabbing his rifle and moving to the window to peer out into the darkness. In the distance, he could see the orange glow of fires, not campfires, but the harsh light of buildings burning. More shots followed, along with the sound of horses and shouting voices. Someone was under attack, and from the direction of the sounds, it was happening at the small Lakota camp that Daniel knew existed in the hidden canyon about 5 miles north of his ranch. His blood ran cold as he realized what was happening. This wasn't a military action against hostile warriors. This was a night raid, the kind of surprise attack that left no survivors to tell tales of what had really happened. Without conscious thought, Daniel found himself pulling on his clothes and saddling his fastest horse, checking his weapons and supplies with the automatic efficiency of a man who had grown up expecting violence. He knew he should stay out of it, should protect himself and his property by remaining neutral. But he also knew that innocent people were dying out there. His mother's people, children and elders, who had never raised a hand against anyone. The horse he chose was a big buckskin gelding named Thunder, an animal with Lakota bloodlines that could run all day and had the intelligence to find its way through difficult country in the dark. Daniel had raised Thunder from a colt, and the horse responded to his touch like an extension of his own body. The ride to the canyon took 20 minutes across rough ground, and with each mile, the sounds of violence grew louder. By the time Daniel reached the edge of the camp, the attack was nearly over. Soldiers in blue uniforms moved through the burning lodges with methodical efficiency, shooting anything that moved while their commander shouted orders from horseback. Daniel recognized the officer immediately, Captain Reynolds, a man known throughout the territory for his belief that the only good Indian was a dead Indian. Reynolds had apparently decided to solve the Indian problem in his jurisdiction with a single decisive blow, wiping out the peaceful band that had been living quietly in the canyon for months. Hidden in the rocks above the camp, Daniel watched in horror as the massacre unfolded below. Men, women, children. The soldiers showed no mercy to anyone, cutting down unarmed people who were trying to flee or surrender. The smell of smoke and blood filled the air, and Daniel had to fight down the urge to vomit as he witnessed the systematic slaughter of people who might have been his cousins or childhood friends. This wasn't warfare. It was butchery. The Lakota in the camp had clearly been caught completely by surprise, with no time to organize any kind of defense. Most of the warriors must have been away hunting, leaving only the most vulnerable members of the band to face Reynolds' surprise attack. Daniel could see bodies scattered around the burned lodges, and he knew that many of them belonged to children and elderly people who had posed no threat to anyone. It was then that he saw her. A young Lakota woman, perhaps 18 or 19 years old, was running through the chaos with a small child clutched in her arms. She wore traditional clothing decorated with intricate beadwork, and even in the firelight, Daniel could see that she was beautiful. High cheekbones, long black hair that streamed behind her as she ran, dark eyes wide with terror but still filled with fierce determination. 2 soldiers were chasing her, their sabers drawn, clearly intent on cutting her down before she could escape into the darkness. The woman stumbled, nearly falling, and Daniel saw her look back over her shoulder with the kind of desperate fear that only comes when death is reaching out to claim you. The child in her arms was crying, the sound barely audible over the crackling of flames and the shouts of the soldiers. Daniel didn't think. He simply acted. Spurring Thunder down the rocky slope, he burst into the firelight with a war cry that would have made his Lakota ancestors proud. The soldiers turned in surprise, momentarily confused by the appearance of this wild figure on horseback, and in that moment of hesitation, Daniel reached the woman. "Up here!" he shouted, extending his hand toward her. "Quickly!" She looked at him with a mixture of hope and confusion, clearly not understanding his words, but recognizing the offer of rescue. Without hesitation, she thrust the child toward him, and Daniel scooped the little one up with one arm while reaching down to pull her onto his horse with the other. The soldiers recovered from their surprise and began shooting, bullets whining past Daniel's head as he spurred Thunder toward the canyon rim. Behind him, he could hear Captain Reynolds shouting orders, his voice harsh with fury at seeing his prey escape. More shots rang out, and Daniel felt one bullet tug at his sleeve while another splinged off a rock just inches from Thunder's hooves. The climb out of the canyon was treacherous in the darkness, made worse by the need for speed and the extra weight of 2 passengers. But Thunder was sure-footed and strong, and the horse seemed to understand the urgency of their situation, picking his way up the rocky trail with careful haste, while Daniel tried to shield his passengers from any pursuing gunfire. Within minutes, they had reached the safety of the high ground above the massacre site, but Daniel didn't slow down. He knew that Reynolds would send men after them as soon as he could organize a pursuit, and their only hope was to reach his ranch before the soldiers could catch up. Only when they were well away from the canyon did Daniel allow himself to look at the people he had saved. The child was a boy, perhaps 4 years old, with dark eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. He clung to the woman with desperate intensity, his small body shaking with terror and shock from what he had witnessed. The woman herself was clearly wounded. Daniel could see blood seeping through her dress from what looked like a bullet graze along her ribs. But her eyes were alert and intelligent, and there was a strength in her bearing that spoke of someone who had not given up hope, despite witnessing the worst that humanity could offer. "Thank you," she said in careful English, her voice soft but clear, despite her obvious pain. "You save us when you could have stayed safe." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I couldn't watch them kill you," he said simply. "What's your name?" "Winona," she replied, adjusting her grip on the child while trying not to jar her wounded side. "Means firstborn daughter in my language. This is my brother, Chaitan. Means falcon. Our family." She gestured toward the burning camp behind them, unable to finish the sentence. Daniel nodded, understanding without words. Her family was gone, swept away in the tide of violence that had consumed the peaceful camp. She and the boy were probably the only survivors, and even that would be temporary if Reynolds caught up with them. "Listen to me, Winona," Daniel said urgently as they rode through the darkness. "I have a ranch about 5 miles south of here. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next." She studied his face in the dim starlight, taking in his mixed features and the traditional Lakota ornaments he wore alongside his white man's clothing. "You are like us," she said finally, "part of both worlds." "My mother was Lakota," Daniel confirmed. "My father was white. I've spent my whole life trying to honor both sides, trying to find a path between the hatred." Oh, the ride to Daniel's ranch was tense and dangerous, with the constant fear that Reynolds and his men might be following their trail. But Daniel knew this country better than any army patrol, and he was able to lead them along hidden paths that would be difficult to track in daylight, let alone in the darkness. Thunder seemed to sense the danger, moving with careful silence while maintaining the steady pace that would get them to safety. By the time they reached the ranch, young Chaitan had fallen asleep in Winona's arms, exhausted by the trauma and terror of the night. Daniel helped them both down from his horse and led them into the warmth and safety of his house, where he could properly tend to Winona's wound and give them both the food and rest they desperately needed. The interior of Daniel's house reflected his mixed heritage as clearly as his appearance did. Traditional Lakota items hung on the walls beside photographs and books, while the furniture was a mixture of white and Indian craftsmanship. A sacred pipe rested on the mantelpiece next to a Bible, and bundles of sage and sweetgrass shared shelf space with medical supplies and ammunition. As he cleaned and bandaged the bullet graze on Winona's side, she told him more about what had happened. Her band had been living peacefully in the hidden canyon for months, causing no trouble to anyone, hunting and gathering in the traditional ways while trying to avoid the conflicts that were tearing the territory apart. They had chosen the remote location specifically to stay away from the main trails and settlements, hoping to live quietly until the current wave of anti-Indian sentiment passed. But Reynolds had apparently decided that their very existence was a threat. Using the excuse of some distant raid that her people had nothing to do with, he had launched a surprise attack designed to eliminate every man, woman, and child in the camp. Winona and Chaitan had survived only because they had been sleeping in a lodge at the edge of the camp and had managed to escape in the initial confusion. "Most of our warriors were away," Winona explained as Daniel worked on her wound. "They went north to hunt buffalo before the winter comes. Only the old men and young boys were left to protect the women and children. When the soldiers came, there was no time to fight, only time to run." Her voice broke as she described watching her parents and grandparents cut down as they tried to flee their burning lodge. "My father, he was a peace chief, always spoke for friendship with the whites. He never raised his hand in anger against anyone, but they shot him down like a dog." Daniel felt a familiar cold rage building in his chest, the same fury he had felt during his childhood when he witnessed the casual cruelty that seemed to poison relations between the races. This wasn't a military action against hostile warriors. This was a massacre of innocent people, the kind of atrocity that would be covered up and forgotten while newspapers celebrated another victory against the savage Indians. "He will come for us," Winona said quietly as Daniel finished bandaging her wound. "This captain, he does not leave witnesses to tell what really happened. He will hunt us until we are dead." Daniel knew she was right. Reynolds couldn't afford to have survivors spreading stories about his unauthorized massacre. He would hunt them with the same methodical efficiency he had shown in attacking the camp, and he wouldn't stop until they were silenced permanently. "Then we need to be ready for him," Daniel said grimly. "But first, you both need rest and food. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you to safety." Winona and Chayton stayed hidden at Daniel's ranch for 3 days, while he carefully reached out to his network of contacts throughout the territory. The story he pieced together was even worse than he had feared. Reynolds had indeed conducted an unauthorized massacre, using forged orders and false reports to justify his actions to his superiors back at Fort Laramie. The captain was gambling that a swift, decisive action would advance his career, especially if there were no survivors left to contradict his version of events. Most of Winona's band had been killed or scattered, but Daniel learned through his contacts that a few survivors had made it to the mountains where other free bands were still holding out against the government's relocation efforts. The challenge was getting Winona and Chayton safely to the survivors without running into any of the patrols that were scouring the countryside for them. During those 3 days, Daniel got to know his unexpected guests better. Winona proved to be highly intelligent and well-educated, speaking better English than many white settlers he had known. Her father had sent her to a mission school for several years, believing that understanding white ways would help their people survive in a changing world. But she had also been carefully trained in traditional Lakota customs and beliefs, making her a living bridge between two cultures. Young Chayton was still traumatized by what he had witnessed, often waking in the night with screams that spoke of horrors no child should ever see. But he was beginning to respond to Daniel's gentle patience, and Winona's presence seemed to give him the security he needed to start healing from his ordeal. "You are a good man," Winona told Daniel on the 3rd evening as they sat by his fireplace. "My father would have liked you. He always said that there were still some whites who remembered honor." Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks at the compliment. "I just try to do what's right. Sometimes that's not enough." "It is always enough to try," Winona replied. "My grandmother used to say that the spirits judge us not by our success, but by our intentions. You risk your life to save strangers, ask for nothing in return. That is the mark of a true warrior." On the 4th night, Daniel woke to see flickering lights in the distance, not the harsh glare of lanterns or the steady glow of campfires, but something else entirely. Hundreds of small flames, arranged in what looked like a perfect circle around his ranch house, stretching as far as the eye could see. He grabbed his rifle and moved cautiously to the window, his heart pounding as he tried to understand what he was seeing. The lights were moving, dancing in the darkness like stars that had fallen to earth, and as he watched, more appeared until his entire ranch was surrounded by a constellation of flickering flames that cast dancing shadows across the landscape. "Winona," he called softly. "Come look at this." She joined him at the window, young Chayton still asleep in her arms, and Daniel saw her face transform with wonder and relief as she took in the sight before them. "My people," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They come for us." As they watched, figures began to emerge from the darkness beyond the lights, Lakota warriors on horseback, moving with the ghostly silence that had made them legendary among both their enemies and allies. But these weren't hostile war parties bent on destruction. They carried torches and sacred fire, moving with the dignity and formality that spoke of ceremony rather than combat. The sight was breathtaking. Nearly 200 mounted warriors arranged in a perfect circle around Daniel's ranch, each holding a torch that added to the ring of sacred light. Their horses stood motionless as statues, and the warriors themselves sat with the kind of formal dignity that Daniel remembered from the great ceremonies of his childhood. Daniel and Winona stepped outside to meet them, and Daniel felt his breath catch as he recognized some of the faces in the torchlight. These were warriors from several different bands, survivors of the massacre, refugees from other attacks, free Lakota who had managed to avoid the reservations and were now united in honoring the man who had saved two of their own. The leader was a man Daniel recognized as Chief Standing Bear, a war leader whose reputation for wisdom and courage was known throughout the plains. The chief sat his horse with the dignity of someone who had led his people through countless battles and hardships, his weathered face marked with the traditional paint of ceremony. He wore a magnificent war bonnet that flowed down his back like a waterfall of eagle feathers, and his chest was painted with symbols that spoke of great deeds and spiritual power. "Daniel Whitehorse," Standing Bear said in formal Lakota, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Son of two worlds, you have shown great courage in saving our daughter and her brother when the soldiers came with fire and death." Daniel felt suddenly self-conscious, aware that he was surrounded by nearly 200 Lakota warriors, all of them holding torches that created a circle of sacred light around his ranch. The flames danced in the darkness like the fires of the spirit world, and Daniel realized he was witnessing something that few white men had ever seen, a traditional Lakota ceremony of honor and adoption. "I did what anyone should do," Daniel said in his mother's language, the words coming back to him with surprising ease after years of speaking mostly English. Standing Bear smiled, and Daniel was struck by the warmth and dignity in the old chief's face. "No," he said firmly, "not anyone. You chose to risk your life when you could have chosen safety. You saved our children when you could have saved only yourself. You acted with the heart of a true Lakota warrior, even though you wear the clothes of the white world." The chief dismounted and approached Daniel, carrying something wrapped in sacred buffalo hide. Around them, the circle of warriors remained motionless, their torches creating a cathedral of light in the darkness while the ceremony unfolded. "Among our people," Standing Bear continued, "when someone shows great courage in protecting our young ones, they are welcomed fully into the tribe. You have Lakota blood through your mother, but tonight you earn your place through your actions, through the choices you made when evil threatened the innocent." What followed was unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced, even during his childhood among his mother's people. The ceremony was conducted entirely in Lakota, with Standing Bear speaking in the ancient rhythmic cadence of ritual, while the assembled warriors listened in respectful silence. Daniel couldn't follow all the formal language, but he could feel the power and significance of what was happening. The speech seemed to go on for hours, with Standing Bear recounting Daniel's actions in detail, describing how he had risked everything to save Winona and Chayton, how he had provided them with shelter and protection when he could have turned them away. The chief spoke of courage and honor, of the ancient bonds that connected all people of good heart, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. When the formal speeches were finished, the warriors began to approach one by one, each carrying a torch and offering a gift. A young brave presented him with a magnificent war lance, its shaft decorated with eagle feathers and coup marks that told the story of great deeds in battle. An elder gave him a sacred shield made from buffalo hide and painted with symbols of protection and power. The gifts kept coming. A war bonnet made from the finest eagle feathers, weapons decorated with silver and brass inlay work, blankets woven in patterns that had been passed down through generations. Each item represented not just material value, but spiritual significance, marking Daniel as someone who had earned the highest honor the Lakota could bestow. A medicine man presented him with a sacred pipe carved from red stone, explaining in formal Lakota that it would ensure his words would always be heard with respect among all the tribes. A war chief gave him a rifle decorated with traditional designs, telling him that it had belonged to a great warrior who had died fighting for his people's freedom. But it was Winona's gift that moved him most deeply. She approached carrying a shirt made from the finest buckskin, decorated with quillwork and beadwork that must have taken months to complete. The design depicted a figure standing between a burning village and a group of fleeing people, his arms extended in protection. "This is you," she explained as she presented it to him, speaking in both Lakota and English so that all could understand. Standing between our world and the world of violence, protecting the innocent, showing that not all who have white blood have forgotten honor. My grandmother began this shirt many moons ago when she had a vision of a man who would save her descendants. She said he would be a bridge between worlds, a keeper of the sacred fire. I finished it for you. As Daniel accepted each gift, he felt the weight of what was happening. These weren't just presents. They were symbols of acceptance, tokens of a bond that would connect him to the Lakota people for the rest of his life. He was being formally adopted into the tribe, welcomed as a full brother to people who had every reason to distrust anyone with white blood. "Why?" he asked Standing Bear when the gift-giving ceremony was finished. "Why take such a risk, bringing so many people here? The army could arrive at any moment." Indeed, the old chief's expression grew serious as he gestured toward the circle of torches that still burned bright in the darkness. "Because honor demands it," he said simply. "Because when someone risks everything to save our children, we do not forget. Because in these dark times, when it seems that all whites have become our enemies, we must celebrate those who remember that we are all human beings." Standing Bear placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder, and Daniel could feel the strength and warmth in the old warrior's grip. "These fires are not for war, Daniel Whitehorse. They are the sacred fires of family, the lights that call the spirits to witness our ceremonies. Tonight, you are truly one of the people, and we celebrate your courage with the honor it deserves." The celebration continued through the night, with songs and stories shared around the torches. Daniel found himself passed from group to group, with warriors and elders eager to meet the mixed-blood man who had proven his loyalty to the people. Language flowed freely between Lakota and English, and Daniel felt a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before, even during his childhood, among his mother's relatives. The warriors told him stories of their own acts of courage, of battles fought and won, of the ancient traditions that connected them to the spirits of their ancestors. They spoke of their hopes for the future, of their determination to preserve their way of life, despite the pressure to abandon everything that made them who they were. As dawn approached, Standing Bear took Daniel aside for a private conversation, while the other warriors began the process of extinguishing their torches and preparing to fade back into the landscape. "There is something you must know," the chief said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of hard experience. "The soldier chief who attacked our camp, he will not forget what happened here. He knows you helped our daughter escape, and he will want to silence you before you can tell others what you witnessed." Daniel had been thinking the same thing. Reynolds couldn't afford to have witnesses to his unauthorized massacre, especially witnesses with connections to the white community who might be believed when they told their story. "I can take care of myself," Daniel said, but Standing Bear shook his head gravely. "No one should face such danger alone," the chief replied. "From this day forward, you are under the protection of all the free bands. If this soldier chief threatens you, if anyone threatens you, send word to us. We do not abandon family, and you are family now." The offer was both practical and deeply moving. Having the protection of the Lakota warriors would definitely make Reynolds think twice about any direct action against Daniel. But more than that, it meant that Daniel was truly accepted as one of the people, entitled to their loyalty and support. As the sun rose and the torches were extinguished, the warriors began to fade back into the landscape as silently as they had come. But before they left, Standing Bear had one final gift for Daniel. "Winona and her brother will stay with you for now," he said. "Not as refugees, but as family. She's a teacher and healer among our people, and the boy shows signs of being a great warrior someday. They will help you maintain this sacred place while serving as a bridge between our peoples." Daniel looked at Winona, seeing the strength and intelligence in her dark eyes. The arrangement made perfect sense. If peace was ever going to be possible between whites and Indians, it would require people who could understand and communicate with both sides. "We would be honored to stay," Winona said simply, speaking for herself and her brother. And so began a partnership that would transform all their lives. Winona proved to be not just a skilled healer and teacher, but a natural diplomat, helping Daniel navigate the complex relationships between the various tribes and the white settlements. Young Chayton grew up speaking both languages fluently, learning both traditions, becoming exactly the kind of bridge between worlds that would be needed in the years to come. Reynolds did indeed try to cause trouble, accusing Daniel of harboring hostile Indians and demanding military action against the ranch. But by then, word of what had really happened at the Canyon Massacre had reached territorial authorities through Daniel's contacts in the white community. The captain found himself facing a court-martial for conducting unauthorized operations against peaceful Indians, and his military career came to an abrupt and disgraceful end. Daniel's ranch became a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict. Travelers from both cultures would stop there to trade, to seek healing from Winona's traditional medicines, or simply to see the place where a man had chosen courage over safety and had been honored for it by an entire people. The sacred shirt that Winona had given him hung in their bedroom for the rest of his life, carefully preserved as a reminder of the night that had changed everything. And when visitors asked about it, about the meaning of the intricate beadwork that depicted a figure protecting the innocent from violence, Daniel would tell them the story of a young woman and her brother who had needed help, and a man caught between two worlds who had discovered that sometimes the greatest courage came from choosing the right side, regardless of the cost. Years later, when Daniel was an elder and Winona had become his wife, and Chayton had grown into a respected leader among the younger generation, they would sometimes sit on the porch of the ranch house in the evening and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. They would talk about that incredible night when 200 warriors had surrounded them with sacred fires, about the ceremony that had transformed a moment of desperate courage into a bond that would last for generations. "You changed everything," Winona would tell him, "not just for me and Chayton, but for all our peoples. You showed that it was possible to choose love over hatred, courage over fear, family over blood." Daniel would always protest that he had simply done what felt right, but Winona would shake her head with the wisdom of someone who had lived through the transformation. "No," she would say firmly, "what you did was refuse to let fear make your choices for you. When you could have stayed safe, you chose danger. When you could have protected only yourself, you chose to protect others. When you could have remained silent about what you witnessed, you chose to speak for justice. Those choices, they lit sacred fires that are still burning today." The story became legend among both peoples, told around fires and in lodges, passed down through generations as proof that even in the darkest times, individual acts of courage could create circles of light that would spread far beyond their original source. It was a reminder that heroism often came in quiet moments, in the choice to help instead of hurt, to protect instead of profit, to build bridges instead of walls. In the end, that was Daniel's greatest legacy, not the successful ranch he had built or the peace he had helped to maintain between competing cultures, but the proof he had provided that human decency could triumph over prejudice. that love could indeed conquer fear, and that one man's choice to do the right thing could literally light sacred fires that would burn for generations to come.